Hey, left, right, out. We're going to talk about the pipeline a little bit about what the market's doing. But let's start off with this pipeline business, Nord Stream 2 and 1. Apparently, there was some, explosion there. This happened last week. And I, took time I wanted to listen, gather some information, have a coherent thought. Because initially, and rightfully so, initially you have your reactions. To what it is, but it's good to just take a step back. So listen to some mainstream stuff, listen to even like a Glenn Beck types and people they had on, and everything from the West is coming out that this is Russia that sabotaged this. And for me, I wanted to take that step back from that, and so I looked around, I got some other information, really went through my own thought process, because it's what I always ask myself now, like, who has the means? Okay, well, if we look at who has the means, yeah, Russia does have the means to do so. But they also have different means. They can close it off. You know, that's effectively the same thing. And then there's always a possibility of being able to reestablish, relations and sell again. So Russia has the means. The U.S. has the means. So we're just going down our list of suspects here. The U.S. has the means. Europe, we'll just group Europe together as a whole, has the means. I guess the UK, which I guess call them Europe, but they're Brexit or whatever. Anyway, they have the means. Ukraine has the means, and hear me out on that one, because they've been funded like you would not believe. So they get tens of billions of dollars from us. Like, where does it all go? We don't know. They have the means to do so as well, through strictly a funding mechanism. Maybe they don't have the manpower or whatever, but they definitely do have the dollars to find somebody that can do so. So we look at those things. We now look at who has the motive. Okay, so you have the means, and who has the motive? Okay, well, in that regard, Russia, I'm looking at their motive, because we'll just take them off the top. I'm like, well, what is the motivation to do so? Because they already can close off the pipeline, right? It's effectively the same thing, only when it's just closed off, you can always use that as a negotiating tool, a bargaining chip, or, if you guys do strike an agreement further on, it's an economic, driver. It's a good transaction for both Russia and Europe. So they don't really have the motive, unless you're calling maybe a false flag type thing. But then even that, because it's such an economic, it takes so much leverage out of Russia's hands. So I don't give them the motive. They don't have the motivation to do so. They actually want to end this war, and establish those zones of Donetsk, the Donbass and Crimea and the land bridge there. They're taking them in through referendum, which we'll get to in a second, which I told you about months ago. Putin told you that, but anyway. So who has a motive? Well, the U.S. has a motivation. If we go down the list of suspects here, the U.S. has a motivation, and it seems like it's politically advantageous to have this kind of conflict going on. One, because it just, conflict tends to drive political bases together, and helps gather support. It also, if you are nefarious in some ways, this place has been a known corrupt money laundering scheme, which we know from the Bidens and whatnot. So being able to have that excuse to keep piling money through there, and wherever it goes, we don't really know. That's a motivation, and there's evidence to back that. Other motivation: Ukraine. This is a money scheme. They want to keep this war going because it's basically bringing in. It's their largest probably source of income at this point, through aid of dollar aid, through military aid. All kinds of stuff is going on there. So you're paying for people's pension funds, apparently, and their, villas and all kinds of weird things that are, this money's, we have no idea what's going on. So they have the motivation in the sense, they have the motivation to keep this conflict going, and to even pull NATO even further into this, not just us, get Europe more into this, into the fray here. So Ukraine has that motivation, not only that, and also to become part of NATO in order to, do all the things we've been talking about. It's pretty self-evident at this point. So the motivations lie mainly in Europe. has the motivation in the same regard, because as the U.S., because this is it is a money game over there. I mean, you can those politically connected people, that are aristocracy, to or the oligarchy, whatever this to summarize it, has an incentive to keep Ukraine in their hands and corrupt, and it's a good way to launder money or whatnot. So they have an incentive to do so. They have an incentive militarily as well, because of just the nature of NATO and their vision for like a military. I guess military conquest is the best thing. I mean, just from what we're talking about. Also, from the West, they've said that they've made threats about Nord Stream 1 and 2. They've told them that they would close these things down. Now, how they would do that, we had no idea, but they did. So means motive lie in the West, and I just look at it. So I can't say what who actually did it, but if I had to put my money, if I was betting person, you told me you have to pick somebody that did this, and I would put it on the West. I would put it, could be Germany, I doubt it. I mean, the Europeans, because if you look at who benefits the greatest and is impacted the least, it'd be the U.S., to be totally honest. Not to say that Europe would, but Europe would be shooting themselves in the foot for further on down the line. You had the, if relations ever normalized, or this conflict ever came down to, came down from the boiling point, and you can reestablish ties and get natural gas flowing again. Now, that's out of the window. Like, if the U.S. was afraid of Russia sucking in Europe as an ally through means of pretty much economic warfare, economic dependency, then yeah, anyway, hang on one second. Through economic warfare. So to summarize it, if I'm an investigator, I'm looking at this, it all points towards more of a U.S. operation or a Ukrainian operation. Those are the guys that have least the risk in doing this and most to gain. So that's my summarization. Now I wanted to address this. The thing that I've talked about over the last months is that the melding in the referendum style taking of those regions officially in the Russian territory. Now, here's the thing. I will say this. Now, when I looked at the numbers, 92%, 95% or whatever, those are very Stalin, and the West has jumped on that. Those are very Stalinistic numbers, and I was initially skeptical. I knew this was going to happen, but I didn't know that Russia would be that dumb to allow it to be like 95% of people voted. But here's the thing, and I was skeptical. I was like, well, they did it. We knew they were going to do it, and they did it. Maybe they fudged the numbers. But then you take further look, which doesn't seem to be widely reported in the West, that Ukraine was threatening people who participated in the election. And also, you take in this current circumstances of the last, since 2014, and further, then you look at previous elections, and it makes a lot more sense. So you take the voter participation, and you take out the people who didn't participate and would normally would have, and you can see that those 95% numbers probably are skewed, but they would have still voted to join Russia. You're just got to include like the 30% of people that didn't vote, or maybe they can't because they're dead, or whatever the case may be, but there's a large block that wouldn't vote out of fear that Ukraine was going to retaliate against them if they ever were to, somehow get to them. So to me, it's like those were the opposition votes. So, and there was a lot of international oversight, actually. I mean, Russia had requested this, not to say that they're infallible or anything, but they were threatened by NATO and these countries that went up there to observe the elections. But anyway, so you look at those numbers, and then like, okay, the 95% reported rate, or the 92%, those elections, they actually don't seem that far off. And then you take into account, so it would have been more like, probably more if you'd all the people that were threatened and were not allowed to go to the polls. So you're looking at probably like a 70-30 vote or something like that. I mean, the numbers become more rational once you realize that there's threats and probably some intimidation from the Russian side of things too, but from both sides, Ukraine and Russia. So there's probably, 35% of the people probably wanted to stay with Ukraine, maybe, in a lot of these regions, some of them more so than others. So it's just one of those things. You just got to be cognizant of that. But anyway, it's happening. It doesn't really matter. That's how I'm looking at it. It's like it's happening. I don't care about the politics. And this sets the stage for possible greater conflict if we keep funding this thing and not going to peace, or not, negotiating peace, or pushing Ukraine to do so.